Feminism is innately political, and like any other social phenomena, it is hard to define, let alone to provide an agreed definition for. Probably, the best approach to definition is historical. Through historical struggle, we can define what feminism is. What is feminism? Feminism problematizes the fundamentally political relationship between gender and power. It is a movement and body of ideas that aims to enhance women's status and power. It questions the ways that are natural. Question is it still a coherent project, or is it a meta theory? Or, better, is it a developing dialogue around a common but evolving agenda? There are many kinds of feminism, but now I would just like to talk about three. First, liberal feminism. Liberal feminism tended to build, though not uncritically, on many of the assumptions of existing liberal thought, with its emphasis on individual rationality, the public-private distinction, and the reformability of institutions. Marxist feminism is built on the tenets of Marxism. It demonstrates in how, in one way or the other, female oppression is functional to capitalism. It gets the term gender systems, problematizes it, and interrelates it with class. Some would like to refer to it as dual systems approach or the socialist feminism. Radical feminism is the newest, least precedented element. It defined liberal feminism as too accepting of the system, and it provided Marxist feminism with the more defined definition of what is going on between sex, gender, and class. Radical feminism defined sex wars as the most basic political struggle. Radical feminism reiterates more than liberal Marxist feminism that the private sphere is the terrain where women's oppression was founded, focusing on the private sphere as defined by physical or sexual dimension of male oppression. There are four waves in feminism. The first one emerging in the 1900s for women's suffrage. The second one, not just for enfranchisement but also equality, emerged in the 1960s. The third one, promoting individuality and diversity in women. And the current one, the fourth wave, from 2013 up to now, is the so-called internet feminism. As the strands of feminism evolve, there's the question, is there really a need for feminism when clearly there's biological differences between men and women? The only thing that makes the male and female difference problematic is the socially constructed outcome of how sex was turned into gender, and then later on converted into gender powers. Radical feminism is most prominent in the last two waves rather than the first two ones. Radical feminism is highly contested in current times because of its biological determination and exclusivity of being women to only natural-born females. In Marxist feminism, there are two elements present, sex and class. In the problematization of the relationship of sex and class, there comes the re-articulation of our social privileges. There becomes now an event of the politicking of identity due to these social privileges. With regard to how women are lowly treated in workplaces, feminism has been described as going through three epistemological phases: rationalist or positivist, anti-rationalist, and post-rationalist or interpretive. Through time, it has been harder to define what feminism stands for or fights for. Is it equality? Is it labor rights? Feminism challenged traditional modes of conceptualizing politics and the political in the discipline. We must acknowledge the diversity of feminist positions regarding political participation and the state of theory and in practice. While feminists are divided from the outset over how far to engage with mainstream political institutions, radical and Marxist feminists tended to depict themselves as revolutionaries, and liberal feminists as reformists. The provider for new feminist thinking is radical feminism. Liberal feminism for a long time tended to take the existing frame of governing institutions and assumptions on trust, although this is now less true. Marxist feminists, while rejecting the liberal conception, accepted much less critically a Marxist conception of politics that equated it closely with class struggle. Ask 4 questions. The first one, what is the scope of politics? For Marxist feminists, they would like to equate it with the formula, who gets what, when, and how. And for radical feminists, its particular has argued for the broader conception of politics as relationships of power, but with the emphasis on power relations between men and women, and whenever and wherever they occur. The boundary between political science and sociology appears particularly arbitrary. Much of what sociology deals with family relationships, sexual behavior, welfare functions. And from a feminist perspective, it is clearly political. Now, should political science expand to embrace these aspects of the social for it not to be male-centric and embody women's studies? Feminism questioned the conventional understanding of the scope and nature of politics, refusing to endorse the distinction between private and public spheres and highlighting the ubiquitous role of male power or patriarchy and the masculine character of mainstream political institutions. We put into question patriarchy or male dominance. While it worked through different levels and agencies, patriarchy made itself responsible for the questioning of public and private spheres. The radical feminist notion of patriarchy was taken up more widely and elaborated in different ways. At the same time, other feminist stands criticized its tendency to be ahistorical, to disregard cultural differences, to underestimate women's sources of power, and in all these ways to falsely universalize women's experiences. However, patriarchy springs back to the most basic unit of a society, human being. Male as assigning women to a subordinate position when it comes to making a family. Lastly, along with the notions of patriarchy, women regarded as men's laws as highly male-centric, aggressive, hierarchical, and focused on male interests. The participation of women in politics is encouraged because of what we call the ethic of care, which men lack. In making laws that both benefit men and women, it is essential that women take part of these decisions. To summarize this, radical feminists heavily critiques rather the conventional understanding of the scope of the character of politics. It rejects the public-private distinction as an ideology and discerns an underlying system of patriarchy and condemns the masculinism of public politics. Since feminists viewed political science as a highly male-dominant discipline, the state is guarded with deep suspicion and viewed as an agent of capitalism and or patriarchy. While there may not be any grand theory supporting that the state is a patriarchal and capitalist instrument, feminist thinkers have tried their best to answer not only normative questions but also constitutive questions raised by women's engagement with specific political institutions, processes, and policies. Connell uses the term gender regime to describe how the state embodies a set of power relationships between men and women, which itself is a precipitate of its earlier gender history. The gender regime operates through hierarchy, the division of labor, and the structure of catexis or emotional attachment. Viewing gender in this way, the state is both impelled and able to regulate gender relations in society, thereby actually helping to reconstitute the categories being regulated and is thus involved in the historical process generating and transforming the basic components of the gender order. If you view gender regimes this way, Connell is saying that we can both hope for equal call out for both genders, promising a more equal state in policy making. Feminist thinkers also emphasize the lack of women-friendly policies. And also in references, why are they only male examples, no female examples? So, they critique the way academic references are written for it lacks representation of the women entity. Therefore, realizing that we are in a gendered state. No? According to Acker, a gendered state is an advantage and disadvantage, exploitation and control. Action and emotion, meaning and identity, are patterned through and in terms of a distinction between male and female, masculine and feminine. Gender is not an addition to ongoing processes, conceived as gender neutral. Rather, it is an integral part of those processes. While it is acknowledged that existing institutions and the local government is resistant to change, feminist thinkers believe that uh, women's empowerment is for women to be involved in decision making. While the involvement of women in politics is something new, it does not guarantee that we can take hold of influence in lawmaking decisions. Kathleen believes that there is no such thing as gender neutral because if there is such thing as gender neutral, she suggests that female committee chairs should have the same opportunities to influence the legislative process as male chairs, and that the effects of tokenism and marginalization of women should be eliminated. The problems that came with understanding the real deal with feminism is that it one it's universalism. It tends to universalize the struggles and problems that faces a woman. Uh, Number two, essentialism. It promotes the idea that the essence of a woman is to struggle and fight for social position. And three, it is uncritical because it lacks of academic references and academic studies or women's studies, if I must say so. This lack of academic text or this proves the fact that feminist thinkers haven't taken the risk of analyzing political science in a feminist way, and that it just uncritically criticizes male ways in politics. Also, it is restrictive for having the only goal of participating in legislation. Uh, it does not describe in any way what would happen if women were to be involved in policy making. And lastly, it is ineffective because while cultural bounds are holding us back from possible female dominance or male-female equity or equality, uh, feminism fails to provide ways to achieve significant change in the so-called system to empower women's rights and prove its goal. The challenge for feminism is to provide a more systematic way of analyzing male powers in politics and also vice versa. And in order to change the situation, you have first to give a definite understanding of what the situation is. And for Vicky Randall, that is what feminism is missing. Uh, Feminism as an approach, rather, is missing. Uh, until then, until there have been more conclusive, comprehensive women's studies, feminism will much remain as an advocacy.